Welcome back. So, all the chaos you see out there in the world, what if it isn't a collapse? What if it's something else entirely? Today, we're digging into an analysis that makes a really compelling case that what we're seeing is actually a correction, a fix for a system that's been broken for a long, long time. Yeah, this isn't collapse, it's correction. That's the big, provocative idea we're going to unpack. The argument here is that all the turmoil we're feeling, economically, politically, it isn't the end. It's actually the messy, painful, but totally necessary process of fixing some really deep-seated problems. And there's a name for this shift, according to the source we're looking at, the Great Rebalancing. Think of it as a huge recalibration of, well, almost everything. We're talking supply chains, defense, trade, national debt, the works. It's all about ditching this old illusion of a perfectly smooth, frictionless world for one that's actually built to last. Okay, so to really get what this correction is all about, we gotta look at what's being corrected, right? We have to go back to the system that was set up right after the Cold War, a model that basically defined how the world worked for a whole generation. And for about 30 years, this model, it really seemed like it was working. It was built on a few core ideas. We'd get super cheap stuff because labor was globalized. We'd just fuel everything with more and more credit, racking up debt. Our allies, they could spend less on their own defense. And we'd rely on countries that were exactly our friends, like Russia for energy and China for, well, almost everything else. The whole system was geared for one thing and one thing only, making things as cheap and efficient as possible. And look, this was a bargain, right? A deal. We, the consumers, got cheaper stuff, and that felt great. But the argument we're looking at today says there was a massive hidden cost to that bargain. Wages for a lot of people just stayed flat. And that whole industrial foundation that supported the middle class, it just slowly got hollowed out. The problem is, a system that's built only for efficiency is also incredibly fragile. It's like a car with no spare tire. It works great until it doesn't. And eventually, the pressure started building and the cracks began to appear. And these weren't just random, separate problems. They were all symptoms of the same underlying issue. So where's the first crack? Well, it was in the economic model itself. We basically became an economy that was way better at buying things than making things. We were importing goods and, in a way, exporting our debt. And that kind of imbalance, it just started to eat away at the middle of the country, and the middle class along with. And here's the thing, this isn't some fringe idea anymore. I mean, you have guys like Larry Summers, one of the main architects of this whole system, basically saying, yeah, we overdid it. The old belief that the free market could just magically solve every single strategic problem, that idea has really lost its shine. And this right here, this shows you what that looks like in the real world. This isn't some abstract economic theory. This is the real world consequence. Over 6 million manufacturing jobs just gone. That's a huge, seismic shift in the economy, and you better believe it had massive social and political fallout. And how did we keep the whole consumption thing going? Well, with a mountain of debt. Just look at that number, $34 trillion. That is the bill that is now officially coming due. And the crazy part isn't even the total amount, it's what it costs just to maintain it. We're now paying over $1 trillion a year, not to pay it down, but just in interest. Think about that. That's $1 trillion that can't go to building roads or to new research or anything else. It's just gone. And to put that into perspective for you, that's more than we spend on the entire U.S. defense budget. So no, this is not some far-off problem for our grandkids to worry about. It's a massive anchor dragging on us right now, today. Then came the pandemic, and it ripped the cover off a second massive crack in the foundation. Our supply chains. I mean, all of a sudden, we couldn't get masks or basic medicines or even the chips for our cars. It was this huge wake-up call that showed us just how fragile the whole system really was. And it wasn't just a logistics problem, It was a strategic one. We realized we were deeply dependent on a geopolitical competitor. As the Commerce Secretary says here, the feeling now is that this whole economic relationship has been turned into a weapon. And this really gets to the heart of the source's argument. The point is that our relationship with China was never just about getting cheaper stuff. The whole time, according to this analysis, there were these huge national security risks that were just kind of swept under the rug because everyone was so focused on efficiency and cost.
So you've got all these problems just simmering under the surface for years, the debt, the hollowing out of industry. But for a long time, the political establishment just seemed to ignore it. According to this analysis, it was going to take some kind of shock to the system, a disruptive catalyst, to actually force everyone to finally face the music.
And that's where Donald Trump comes into this analysis. The argument here is that his rise wasn't the cause of the crisis, but a symptom of it. It was, in effect, a massive shout from a huge chunk of voters who felt like their concerns about the whole system were being completely ignored for decades. And the analysis points to a pattern here. What the headlines often called chaos, it argues, was actually forcing the issue on problems that had been stalled for years. Take European defense spending. The headlines were all about diplomatic disaster, right? But the outcome? Germany commits to a massive defense upgrade, exactly what the US had been asking for decades. And it's the same story on industrial policy. The perception was a foolish trade war. But the source claims the outcome was that tariffs and reshoring manufacturing actually became a bipartisan strategy. I mean, think about it. Now you have both parties pushing for pretty similar goals with things like the CHIPS Act. That would have been unthinkable just a decade ago. So, what's the upshot of all this? Where are we headed? Well, according to this analysis, we're now moving into a new phase. We're leaving behind that old era of just focusing on efficiency and entering a new one that's all about realism. Now, this doesn't mean globalization is dead. It's more like globalization is growing up. It's maturing. So supply chains, they're going to be shorter, more resilient, and based more on working with allies. Alliance costs? The US won't be footing the whole bill anymore. It's about sharing the burden. And the whole idea of growth is changing. It's about finding a balance between economic growth, national security, and making sure society holds together. So, the big takeaway is this. That easy, almost fantasy-like world that was promised back in the 90s, that's over. What comes next is going to be slower. It's going to be more complicated, for sure. But, the argument goes, it'll be built on a foundation of realism, not illusion. And that leaves us with one final and pretty tricky question. If the fixes for this broken system, things like cutting spending or making tough choices on trade, are the kinds of things that get politicians thrown out of office, then who is actually going to be willing to do them? The solution might be staring us in the face, but finding the political will to actually implement it, well, that's a whole other story.